I am 74 years old now, and I have learned that when trouble comes dressed as kindness, it usually asks you to smile while it takes something from you. I did not learn that lesson quickly. I learned it the slow way, the way that costs time, pride, and sometimes the quiet respect of your own children. After my wife died, the house got quieter than I expected. Not lonely exactly, just hollow. I stayed busy fixing things that did not need fixing and cooking meals that lasted 3 days. My son Daniel called every Sunday, like clockwork. His wife, Melissa, started joining those calls more and more, her voice bright and organized, always sounding like she had already planned the next 10 steps of everyone's life. She liked to say she was just trying to help. I believed her for a long time. Daniel and Melissa lived about 40 minutes away. They had 2 kids, a mortgage that made Daniel sigh when he talked about it, and careers that always seemed one bad quarter away from trouble. I was retired, living on a pension, Social Security, and what I thought were modest savings. Nothing fancy, but enough to sleep at night without fear. That mattered to me. One afternoon, Melissa invited me over for dinner. She said it was nothing special, just family. When I arrived, she hugged me a little too tightly and guided me to the table like I might wander off if left alone. She had papers stacked neatly near her laptop, pushed just far enough away to look accidental. Halfway through the meal, she laughed and said, "Dad, we've been meaning to talk to you about something." Daniel looked down at his plate. That was the first small tightening in my chest, the kind you ignore because you don't want to seem suspicious of your own family. She spoke calmly, carefully, like someone explaining a simple math problem. Estate planning. Power of attorney. Just in case something happened. She said it was for my protection, for peace of mind, so no one could ever take advantage of me. The irony of that did not hit me right away. I nodded. I listened. I asked a few questions. Melissa answered quickly, confidently. Too confidently. Daniel stayed quiet, which told me more than his words ever could. I went home that night uneasy, but not alarmed. I told myself I was being sensitive, that getting older meant learning to accept help. Still, when I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan turning slow and steady, I felt the first clear thought rise up and settle in my chest. Something about this wasn't right. Over the next few weeks, Melissa kept finding reasons to bring it up. A phone call about the kids' school turned into a reminder about getting paperwork in order. A text asking how I was feeling ended with a link to an article about seniors being scammed. She never pushed outright. She nudged, the way a person moves furniture an inch at a time so you don't notice the room changing. Daniel stayed mostly silent. When I asked him directly what he thought, he said, "It makes sense, Dad. Melissa's good with this stuff." He said it the way you say the weather is fine, without looking up. I agreed to meet with a lawyer they recommended. That was my first mistake. He was polite, efficient, and spoke to Melissa more than he spoke to me. When I asked questions, he answered, but always with a glance toward her, like she was the real client. I noticed it, but I told myself I was imagining things. They wanted me to sign a limited power of attorney at first. Just finances, just temporary, just in case. I read every line slowly. Melissa smiled the whole time, tapping her pen lightly on the table, not impatient, just confident. Confidence can be disarming when you're tired. I signed. I wish I could tell you there was a dramatic moment, a hand shaking, a voice in my head screaming no. There wasn't. It felt ordinary, which is how most bad decisions enter your life. Things changed quietly after that. A bill I usually paid myself was suddenly handled. A bank statement stopped arriving in the mail because it had gone digital. When I asked about it, Melissa said it was safer that way. Daniel said nothing. Then one morning, I tried to withdraw a larger sum than usual. The teller hesitated, checked her screen again, and asked me to wait. She came back with a manager who spoke softly and called me, "Sir," too many times. "There's a note on the account," he said. "We need authorization." I remember standing there, heat rising in my face, realizing I needed permission to access my own money. I laughed, because that felt easier than admitting the truth. When I got home, I called Melissa. She answered right away, cheerful as ever. She said it was just a safeguard, just until we updated a few things, just to protect me. That was the moment I understood something important. She wasn't trying to help me manage my life. She was slowly taking control of it. After that call, I stopped arguing. Not because I agreed, but because I understood something new about the situation. Melissa wanted a reaction. She wanted me upset, confused, maybe even loud, so she could point to it later and say, "See, this is why we had to step in." So I stayed calm. I began paying attention instead. I wrote things down in a small notebook I kept in the kitchen drawer. Dates. Times. Little changes that would have seemed harmless on their own. A utility bill paid early without telling me. A subscription cancelled that I still used. A conversation where Melissa spoke for me before I opened my mouth. Daniel visited less. When he did, he looked tired. Not angry, not guilty exactly, just worn down. I recognized that look. It's the look of someone who has already chosen the easier path, even if it's the wrong one. One afternoon, Melissa came by alone. She brought groceries I hadn't asked for and reorganized my pantry while talking about the kids' future. College costs. Housing prices. How important it was to think ahead as a family. She said family the way a business partner says investment. Then she mentioned selling my house. "Not now," she said. "Someday. Downsizing. Something simpler. Something closer to them." She spoke like it was already decided, like I'd missed a meeting where the vote had happened. That night, I sat at my kitchen table long after the lights outside went dark. I thought about my wife planting tomatoes in the backyard. About Daniel learning to ride his bike on that cracked driveway. About the fact that this house was not just an asset on a page. It was my life. I called the bank the next morning, not angry, not accusing. I asked questions. Careful ones. The kind that don't raise alarms. I learned more in 20 minutes than I had in months. Limits. Permissions. Clauses I hadn't fully understood before. I also learned how much power I had already signed away. That was when the fear set in. Not panic, but a steady, heavy fear. The kind that settles into your bones and makes you realize this isn't about hurt feelings anymore. This is about losing control over the last years of your life. I did not confront them. I did not demand anything back. I stayed quiet. And I started preparing, because I knew the truth has a way of surfacing when you give it enough room to breathe. Preparation, at my age, looks different than it did when I was younger. I wasn't plotting or scheming. I was gathering facts and putting my affairs back into my own hands, piece by piece, without making noise. I found an attorney on my own. No recommendations, no family connections. A small office above a bakery, the kind of place that smelled like bread in the afternoon. He listened more than he talked. When I told him everything, he didn't look surprised. He just nodded slowly and said, "This happens more often than people think." That sentence sat heavy with me. We went through every document I had signed. He explained what could be reversed, what would take time, and what would require proof. He warned me not to confront anyone yet. He said control struggles escalate fast when money is involved, especially inside families. I believed him. Meanwhile, Melissa grew bolder. She started checking in on my spending. Small comments at first. Did I really need a new coat? Was that donation necessary? She said it kindly, but kindness with strings attached still pulls. Daniel avoided eye contact when she spoke that way. Once, when she stepped out of the room, he muttered, she just worries, Dad. I wanted to ask him when worrying turned into control, but I didn't. I wasn't ready. The real turning point came when a letter arrived from an investment firm I didn't recognize. It referenced changes I had not approved. Nothing illegal, not yet, but close enough to make my stomach turn. I made copies. I filed them away. Quietly. Melissa called that evening, cheerful as ever, and said she was thinking of consolidating my accounts to simplify things. I told her that sounded fine and thanked her for looking out for me. I could almost hear her relax through the phone. That night, I sat alone in the dark living room, the television off, listening to the house settle. I wasn't angry. I was resolved. There's a difference. Anger wants to be seen. Resolution just wants to be done. I knew then that this was no longer just a family misunderstanding. It was a line being crossed, and once crossed, it doesn't uncross itself. So I waited. Because sometimes the most powerful thing an old man can do is nothing at all, and let people reveal exactly who they are. Melissa made her move sooner than I expected. It came wrapped in politeness, like everything else she did. She invited me to a family meeting at their house on a Saturday afternoon. She said it would be good for all of us to be on the same page. That phrase again. Same page. As if my life were a document they were editing. When I arrived, Daniel was already seated at the table, hands folded, eyes tired. Melissa had folders laid out neatly, color-coded tabs sticking out like flags. She smiled when she saw me, warm and practiced. She started talking right away. About my health. About risks. About how stressful finances can be at my age. She slid a paper toward me and said it was just an update, a clarification to protect everyone involved. I read it slowly. It expanded her authority. Not by much, but enough. Enough to move money without calling me first. Enough to make decisions, in my best interest. I looked up at Daniel. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I said I wanted time to think about it. Melissa's smile tightened just a bit. She said of course, no rush, but then she added something that changed the air in the room. She said if I didn't cooperate, it might raise concerns. About my capacity. About whether I was being stubborn instead of realistic. She said it gently, but the meaning was sharp and clear. That was the moment the ground shifted beneath my feet. I realized this was no longer about help or even control. This was about leverage. About positioning me as a problem if I didn't comply. About creating a story where my resistance could be used against me. I nodded. I thanked her. I said I'd review everything carefully. At home that night, my hands shook for the first time since this began. Not from fear alone, but from the weight of what I understood. If she chose to push this, it could get legal. Ugly. Public. It could cost me not just money, but my independence. I called my attorney the next morning and told him everything. He was quiet for a long moment, then said, "We need to act now, but carefully." So we did. We filed paperwork to revoke the power of attorney. We documented every conversation, every letter, every change. We moved just enough assets to protect them without triggering alarms. All by the book. All clean. I still didn't say a word to my family. Because I knew something they didn't. The truth doesn't need to shout when it has the law on its side, and soon, very soon, Melissa would realize that the quiet old man she thought she was managing had been paying attention all along. The notice went out by certified mail. My attorney handled it, clean and formal, the kind of language that leaves no room for interpretation. The power of attorney was revoked. Effective immediately. Copies sent to the bank, the investment firm, and yes, to Daniel and Melissa. I didn't warn them. Warnings invite arguments, and arguments create stories. I didn't want a story. I wanted a record. Melissa called the same afternoon the letters arrived. She didn't sound cheerful this time. She sounded controlled, tight around the edges. She said there must have been a misunderstanding. She said she was only trying to help. She said revoking things like that made it look like I was confused or acting out of fear. I listened. I let her finish. Then I said something I had been holding on to for weeks. I told her I had my own attorney now. I told her all communication about my finances would go through him. I told her, calmly, that any further action on my accounts without my consent would be documented. There was a long silence on the line. When she spoke again, the warmth was gone. She said, "Daniel will be very upset about this." I said, "Daniel can call me himself." He didn't. Not that day. Not the next. Instead, a letter arrived from a law firm I did recognize. Their letterhead was expensive, confident. It suggested concerns about my decision-making and proposed a review of my capacity, for my own protection. That phrase again. Protection. Always protection. My attorney smiled when he read it. Not a happy smile. A patient one. He said, "They're bluffing, or fishing. Either way, we're ready." We responded with documentation. Medical records. Independent evaluations. Timelines. Evidence of the financial changes attempted without my informed consent. Everything neat, factual, unemotional. The tone changed after that. Daniel finally came by one evening alone. He looked older than I remembered, shoulders slumped, eyes rimmed red. He said Melissa was scared. He said things had gotten out of hand. He asked why I hadn't just talked to them. I told him I had tried, and they hadn't listened. He didn't argue. He just sat there, staring at the floor, and for the first time, I saw the cost of all this written plainly on his face. Not just money. Not just stress. But the weight of choosing comfort over conscience. When he left, he hugged me awkwardly, like a man who wasn't sure what he was allowed to feel anymore. A week later, the legal pressure stopped. No more letters. No more calls. The truth hadn't shouted. It hadn't accused or threatened. It had simply stood there, documented and undeniable, and that was enough to make everything else fall quiet. Silence is strange when you've lived through weeks of tension. At first, it feels like relief. Then it feels like loss. Not of people, exactly, but of what you thought those relationships were. Daniel stopped calling every Sunday. Birthdays passed with short texts instead of visits. Melissa stayed completely out of sight. I heard through a neighbor that they were going through a lot, which felt like a careful way of saying they were dealing with consequences they hadn't planned for. I didn't celebrate any of it. I didn't feel victorious. What I felt was older than that. I felt tired. The hardest part wasn't the legal threat or the fear of losing control. It was accepting that my own son had allowed things to get that far. That he had watched someone speak for me, manage me, quietly corner me, and had chosen peace at home over honesty with his father. That kind of realization settles slowly, like dust. A few months later, Daniel asked if we could meet for coffee. Just the two of us. He looked nervous when he arrived, fidgeting with the cup in his hands. He said Melissa felt embarrassed. He said she thought I had humiliated her. He asked if there was any way to smooth things over. I told him I wasn't interested in smoothing anything over. I told him I was interested in respect. I said I would always be his father, and I would always love him, but my life was not a committee decision. I said if he wanted a relationship with me, it would have to be one where I was treated like a person, not a problem to be managed. He listened. Really listened. When he nodded, I believed him, but belief at my age comes with conditions. Trust is something you rebuild with time, not promises. When we stood to leave, he hesitated and said, "I didn't think it would go this far." I looked at him and said something I had learned too late in life. Things always go as far as people let them. He didn't argue with that. I went home afterward and sat in my living room, the same room where my wife and I had planned futures that never included legal threats from family. I felt a quiet sadness, but also a quiet pride. I had stayed calm. I had stayed legal. I had stayed dignified. And in the end, the truth had spoken for itself, without my raising my voice even once. Life settled into a new rhythm after that. Quieter. Simpler. I went back to paying my own bills, balancing my checkbook the way I always had, feeling the small but important dignity of knowing exactly where my money was and why it moved. That sense of control is something you don't appreciate until someone tries to take it from you. Daniel came by occasionally. Alone. Our conversations were careful at first, like two men walking across thin ice. He talked about work. I talked about the garden. We avoided Melissa's name without agreeing to. It hung between us anyway. One afternoon, months later, he finally brought her up. He said she had been angry for a long time, not just at me, but at him. He said the legal scare had forced conversations they'd been avoiding for years. About control. About fear. About money shaping decisions it had no business shaping. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend myself. He admitted something then that landed heavier than anything else he'd said. He told me part of him had assumed I would always be there to catch them. Financially. Emotionally. He said he didn't realize how unfair that was until it almost cost me my independence. That word again. Independence. I told him something my own father once told me, back when I was young enough to ignore it. I said love that depends on leverage isn't love, it's insurance. And insurance always comes with conditions. Daniel nodded slowly. He didn't argue. That mattered. Melissa never apologized directly. I didn't expect her to. Some people protect their pride the way others protect their children. Fiercely, even when it causes damage. What she did do was step back. Completely. No more suggestions. No more, just trying to help. The distance felt deliberate. I made peace with that. At my age, peace doesn't mean reconciliation. It means clarity. It means knowing where you stand and deciding you can live there without bitterness. I didn't win anything. I didn't take anything from them. I simply kept what was already mine. On quiet mornings, I sit with my coffee and look around the house. The same walls. The same memories. The same life, intact. I think about how close I came to losing more than money. I could have lost my voice. My choices. My sense of self. I stayed quiet, not because I was weak, but because I trusted the truth to do what it always does when given time. It shows itself, and once it does, there's no putting it back. I don't tell this story to warn people about daughters-in-law or lawyers or paperwork. I tell it because growing old doesn't mean surrendering your judgment. It doesn't mean handing over your life just to keep the peace. For a long time, I believed that staying quiet meant being agreeable. I was wrong. Staying quiet can also mean staying observant. It can mean choosing patience over panic, facts over feelings, and dignity over drama. Daniel and I are still rebuilding something. It's slower than before, more careful, but it's honest. I don't know what his marriage will look like in the long run. That's his life to live. Mine is here, steady and my own again. Sometimes I think about how easily this could have ended differently. A raised voice. A bad reaction. One angry accusation, and the story might have been written for me instead of by me. That's the risk older people face more than they like to admit. Once others decide you're difficult, they start deciding everything else for you. I stayed quiet, not because I was afraid, but because I trusted process over emotion. I trusted documentation over confrontation. And in the end, I trusted that the truth, handled carefully, would speak louder than any argument I could make. If there's anything I've learned in 74 years, it's this. You don't need to shout to protect yourself. You don't need revenge to restore balance. You just need to know who you are, what you're entitled to, and when it's time to stop explaining yourself. My daughter-in-law tried to set me up. I didn't fight her. I didn't expose her. I didn't ruin anyone's life. I simply stayed quiet, stood my ground, and let the truth do the talking.